Hello and welcome to Around the Lens, episode 110. I am your host, David J. Murphy. Joining me this week are my co-host, Ron Hamilton. Aloha, Ron. How are you?
Aloha, Dave. Doing well, sir.
Great. Anything new going on in Hawaii?
I have a new laptop, and I'll probably write a story about it for our website so people can see what it's like to edit photos on a Pixel book.
Ooh, Pixel Book. Isn't that the expensive one?
I got the most expensive Pixel book, Dave. I bought the i7 processor with 16 gigabytes of RAM and half a terabyte SSD.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
Kind of like buying a Leica.
Yeah,
and I guess you got better, but it's more expensive, right?
You got Linux installed on that thing?
Yes, sir. I have the Chrome OS. I have Linux. I have Crossover, and I also can run Android apps. So I can run Windows, Android, Linux, and Chrome OS.
Nice. Yeah, definitely curious about that because I've always kind of I've always seen Chromebooks as sort of like cute toys, in the laptop world. But if you can make it work and functional for your day-to-day life, then be curious to hear about that. So look forward eagerly to hearing about your experiences. Before we get on with the show and introduce our guest this week, I do want to let everyone know that if they are a fan or have never heard of The Candid Frame, they should know that I was a guest on that show, and the show that I was on a guest with just went live. So I will put the link in the show notes if you are interested in listening to that episode. I highly recommend it. And I highly recommend just paying attention to The Candid Frame. I think what the host is doing over there is really great, and really excited to not only be a part of it, but also just hear the many other interviews that go on in that show. So again, great show. Check it out. I am the guest this week on the Candid Frame podcast, which is a much larger audience than us. Hopefully, if you heard my episode and you are here because of it, welcome from the Candid Frame to Around the Lens. We hope you enjoy your stay here, and hope you'll become a member of the Around the Lens family. All right, then. Enough self-promotion and cross-promotion. Let's get on with the show. I have two great guests on tonight. We'll start with our brand new guest here, Mr. Charles Mostoller. Is that how we say? Is that correct, Charles?
Pretty close. Right? Mostoller, although there's no real historical record for how to pronounce it, so so it's all good. How you doing? I'm glad to be here.
Good, glad to have you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience.
Well, I'm a photojournalist based in Philadelphia, so didn't get much sleep last night, of course, with
Go Eagles.
All the fireworks. Go Birds, yes. Not much of a football person myself, but I love fandom, and getting the city is just on fire. So
I'm not a football fan either, but you must get excited just by the very nature of the fact, right? That the Super Bowl
I'm wearing an Eagles shirt. Okay, so I've got into it.
Definitely.
But I've been here in Philly for almost six years now. Kind of where I hacked my way into being able to be a full-time photojournalist. After graduating from Columbia Journalism School, the graduate school, where I did a digital media program, which was pretty light on photography. So I learned a lot of stuff that I don't use anymore, like how to make flash graphics and things like that. But it was a great place to learn how to be a journalist. And other than an internship at the Miami Herald, I've kind of just been on my own. Nowadays, I work a lot for Reuters, Bloomberg, depending on the season, for the New York Times and the Post and other national papers. I'm doing a lot less work locally for local papers, but over the years, I have been really doing a lot of local coverage for the local papers here, the Inquirer and our Free Daily Metro. So done a lot of all sorts of different stuff. I've gone to Venezuela a number of times, not anytime recently, which I could talk about later, but Venezuela, and I lived in Mexico, and I've covered the elections there, maybe hoping to cover the upcoming election in Mexico. But I did an exchange in college in Mexico, so I speak Spanish, and I've always been interested in Latin America, so I try to be able to go back and forth. But at the same time, I do think the best way to be a photographer is to just really explore your local environment and do what you can in the place that you know. And so I've been pretty content to stay here in Philadelphia and dig around and see what kind of interesting stories I can find.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I definitely want to talk to you about a couple of those things and a couple of those aspects. I was going to say when you mentioned you were in Philadelphia, I was going to ask if you were from there, but it doesn't sound like you were.
I'm from New Jersey, Central Jersey. So I grew up in Princeton, which is kind of it's the university town, but you're halfway between New York and Philly. So I've been coming to Philly since I was a kid, also going to New York. And so culturally, you're kind of in, I don't know, New Jersey. I mean, which New Jersey is actually a great place to grow up. But
yeah.
So I'm definitely not a Philadelphian. They wouldn't accept me. They wouldn't let me tell you that.
I was gonna ask you, what's up with West Philadelphia? You know, I hear being born and raised out there is the way
tough.
it is.
It's tough. It's still tough out there. Yeah. It's very large too. I only venture out there, so I actually don't know about what's up over there.
So you're a Jersey boy. I actually spent 3 years in New Jersey area, New Jersey State. I was in Joint Base McGuire-Dix Lakehurst.
Yes.
So I'm familiar with being in all those regions. It's nice, kind of, you're equal distant from like New York City and Trenton and Philadelphia. So it's like you can go to all these places, where hubs of activity are at. So interesting place to be. Do you ever go on the Air Force Base? Were you ever have that opportunity when you were living there?
No, I haven't. I usually skirt around it and like fly my drone outside of its airspace. But I go to the Pine Barrens a lot.
Okay.
So I've been around there. But yeah, I've never been. To be honest, I've never even seen, like, I know where the base is, but I've never actually even seen a sign. I've always thought that they did a pretty good job putting it in the Pine Barrens where nobody can even know it's there.
Yeah, it is in the middle of nowhere, but we kind of like that. And our guest panelist this week, joining us from Australia, is Mr. Craig Stampley. How you doing, Craig?
Very good, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. Always glad to have you.
Yeah.
Craig shoots women underwater, I believe. That was your get women underwater. You get them under there and you shoot them.
I actually had a lovely shoot yesterday with a model.
Nice.
And it was very good. Yeah.
Were you
fun.
Were you on TWIP yet?
That's this coming week. Yeah, that's so Thursday for me. So I think it's a Wednesday show. So it'll be Thursday morning for me. So nice. I'll be on that one. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, you have to come back on and tell us all about your experience.
Happy to.
All right, great. Well, Craig's a regular pretty much on the show at this point, so we're not going to go too much into detail about him. But anything interesting happened in the last week or so?
In the last week or so, not really. No, it's been a fairly nice time in Brisbane. Nothing much to report, apart from a model in my pool yesterday.
Nice.
That was a highlight.
I hear that Mr. Tesla is going to go down there and set up what they're calling a virtual power plant with just a bunch of houses and power walls and solar panels. Did you hear about this?
That's down in South Australia, and as far as aware, I thought that was up and running. I could be wrong, but he had a plan to be able to do it in 100 days, or it was going to be free to the state of South Australia. And the last I read about it, I'm pretty sure he got it all installed within the allotted time. So what we have is that part of the country tends to fluctuate a lot with heat.
Yeah,
and they had some bushfires and things like that, and just a lot of disruptions in power. And this was designed to help stabilize the power output to the city and to the rest of the state where possible. But I believe it's the largest of its type in the world, installed in less than 3 months.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, it's just curious to see how that, because he has some really big plans. He wants to bring solar power and a whole big solar grid to Puerto Rico to revolutionize their grid. So he's got a lot of great ideas. We'll see if they actually come to fruition. But better to have big ideas and have them fail than not have any ideas at all. So
well, he's very much leading a lot of things. Not sure about the flamethrower idea, but the rest of it seems to be pretty cool. I mean, I'm a big petrol head or a big rev head, and I'd happily swap my BMW for a Tesla.
There you go. Yeah, my hope is that the next car I buy, and I only buy a car about once every 10 years or so. Mm-hmm. So my hope is the next car I buy will be a self-driving electric car. That's my hope.
Fair enough.
So we'll see where that goes. But anyways, let's get on with the show. We got a lot of show to talk about tonight. Charles, I want to start with you, and I want to start with you because, of course, the way I discovered you is because you were on our Times 100 list of best photos of 2017. So I want to talk to you. I want to start by talking about the photograph that was featured in the magazine. I'm going to put it up here for our anyone who's watching us who can see. But it's a drone shot, I believe, unless you got a really tall ladder. It's a drone shot that, of a cemetery, a Jewish cemetery, tombstones at Mount Carmel Cemetery in Philadelphia. And so why don't you go and talk to us a little about this shot and sort of your feelings about it being selected as a Time Top 100 photo of the year.
So this photograph is Jewish cemetery, not very large, maybe about 3 times the size of what's visible in that photograph, maybe 4 times. Skinny little cemetery surrounded by a bunch of other cemeteries. And I think the date is on that picture like the 28th of February, end of February. And so it's about a month after Trump had been inaugurated. And in the area around Philadelphia, but also nationwide, I'm sure our listeners will remember, there was a slew of bomb threats going to Jewish centers. And I think in St. Louis and a couple other places, there had been some vandalism at cemeteries. In Philadelphia, there had been some swastikas put on Jewish buildings and, feces thrown at a mosque. And so I had been covering all of that stuff, but it's hard to cover bomb threats to a Jewish center and even a swastika on a storefront. It stands out because it's a storefront in America in 2017, but, they're not the most compelling photographs. But it's something that I was really interested in, this spike in outward racism and anti-Semitic attacks. Part of it's because I am half Jewish myself and was raised Jewish, but I think part of it just, it seemed like something was happening at the time. And so then it happened in Philadelphia where I think at all count, there was about 150 gravestones were knocked over.
Wow.
And I went up and I covered it. And I covered it actually a little late. The photograph that I took was actually the day, there was a full news day prior to me actually getting up there. No one told me, no one asked me to go up there, and I had another assignment. So I was actually in South Jersey covering high school sports, and I couldn't go up there. And then I just decided, you know what, I gotta go. I'm gonna go tomorrow. I have nothing going on. I'm gonna go up there and take pictures, see what happens. And there's not much going on. There's a couple people not jotting down names of the tombstones, but it didn't really seem like that much of a event, at least from the ground. And I carry my drone around with me, and I was doing a lot of drone stuff. So I said, you know what, let me get the drone in the air. I pulled up my air map and checked out the airspace and saw that I was just outside of the North Philadelphia airports area. So I would be able to fly. And I didn't even have to get it very far off the ground. That picture is actually pretty close to the ground. Normally you got to get it up a ways before you start getting the new perspective and that view that you can't really get from the ground. It was almost immediate. And it even from the little tiny screen on my phone connected to the remote, you could see holy moly, this is, almost every other gravestone is knocked down. So I immediately knew that that picture was going to be the picture. And so quickly I put it onto Instagram because I reached out to Reuters and they're like, oh, we had someone there yesterday. I reached out to a couple people and everyone was like, oh, we already covered it. So whatever, it's just cemetery. There's just gravestones anyway. And so I put it on Instagram, and 20 minutes later, people are calling me from Time like, hey, can we feature this? And then the next thing you know, American Photo is asking to write something about it. And I think a lot of it had to do, it's a news picture. There was a news hook. This was happening. There was, we're kind of after Charlottesville, we're now oh, white supremacists. But at the time it was what's going on? Why are all these Jewish cemeteries? Is this related to Trump? What's happening in our country? And so there was a lot of interest in it, and it was a drone. So you put drone in the title and immediately people start clicking on it.
Yeah.
And so, of course, I'm glad that that confluence of factors, the fact that it is a picture from above and it's a very stark picture, got it to be seen by more people than just my Instagram. Because I mean, I have a lot of followers, but you know, I mean, just having a lot of followers on Instagram doesn't really mean that anyone's actually seeing this picture and sitting with it for a moment and absorbing it and taking it in. So I was happy to have that recognition just so that people saw this picture, because I think it's really important. And at the time, I was extremely concerned. And so then to have it brought back again, you know, in the top 100 for Time, again, it's, you know, I'm just glad that more people see it. I mean, I look at the drone almost, except for some stuff that I'm doing just to keep myself, you know, fluent with the drone and practiced. I have a kind of like abstract series of looking at the geography of Earth and just looking straight down and that I do. But you know, I'm not submitting that to contests. That's not really like, I'm not trying to sell that stuff. It's just for me to take pretty pictures. But I think the drone is can be a very important tool. And that's really the most important thing, is like, I'm more interested in taking pictures of people, of being a photojournalist. And so while the drone is cool, like, I don't really use it just to use it. You know, I haven't flown recently. I find that it's part of my toolkit. And so I'm just glad that in this situation, it was the perfect tool. And it got a lot of people to see this picture. And I do think that from above, it is more impactful because you can really see the extent of the damage and you know exactly what happened. You don't really need a caption for that picture as long as you know Jewish cemetery. And so when drones can be used in that way, I mean, I've seen pictures, for example, of the migrant crisis in Europe or in the Bangladesh right now, and drone pictures of the stream of humanity are very impactful too. So there's certain moments when it can really be an extremely useful tool. But I'm just glad that more people see it, because it's definitely, even if we're kind of, like I mentioned, perhaps somewhat we're gotten so used to this idea that like racism and anti-Semitism is back, we've become blunted to it. And it is kind of crazy to think that how quickly, I mean, it's not that it ever left, it's always been below the surface, but how quickly it could surge to the forefront. And now we're moved on. We've already moved on. So I'm glad that we're being reminded that before there's another, we don't need guys walking down the streets with swastikas to remember that. Like, I mean, in this picture, I assume that these were children, you know, teenagers who rampaged that. These aren't people who are political actors who have a very good, I mean, maybe it was, but it seems like a juvenile act. So the question is, how many juveniles around the world, even in a relatively liberal place like Philadelphia, around our country, are being told that Jews are so bad that the idea of vandalizing their graves comes to mind as some way of getting that out of your system. That's what I think we need to focus on, the kind of undercurrent, like how do people begin to hate, and where does that come from, and what are we, you know, what have we done to ignore it? Because if it's coming to the forefront so quickly, it must be there just right under the surface, which I think is obvious now, but we need to pull back the rug and say, and examine all of our, we really don't point the blame at places. You know, even in journalism, we have to look in journalism and say what's going on in journalism, which I guess we'll get to soon. But so
what kind of drone do you use?
Well, I'm using a Mavic Pro. I used to have a Phantom. I mean,
I love the Mavic Pro.
Yeah, I'm a pilot, licensed pilot. If there's a big gig and I need a big rig, I'll get a big rig and rent and get someone to fly. But for me, it's more important to have the thing with me, so it's in my car, it's in my camera bag, and it takes fine pictures. I mean, what's the biggest a picture of mine's going to be displayed? If I'm lucky, in Time magazine as a double truck, that would probably be the highest resolution I would need, and the Mavic can handle that no problem. So
that's good.
There's really no reason to carry a big drone around.
No, I mean, that's what I love about the Mavic Pro, because again, it's so small, you can stick it in your camera bag, and I do the same thing. I mean, I've got a pretty small kit myself. I use a Micro Four Thirds kit, so my entire kit with like 6 lenses is still like less than my old kit was with my full frame DSLR with 3 lenses. So that affords me a lot of room to stick the Mavic in there and the controller and everything, and it's such a convenient drone to be able to fold it out. What do you think of the Mavic Air? Are you thinking about moving to that at some point? Because that's even more compact.
Yeah, I mean, if there was something wrong with my Mavic Pro, I would switch. But I've kind of gotten over my like gear replacement. I mean, I do have a D850, so I guess maybe not. But
yeah,
that was
you're lucky few.
Yeah, well, you know, I have enough Nikon gear that I'm NPS priority. So
ooh, nice.
It doesn't really mean anything. But you know, I was at the top of the waiting list.
Okay, nice.
But that's a great camera too. But yeah, no, I mean, I think if I broke this, I would go for the Air. But yeah, as it stands, it works great. And also, you know, you have to kind of relearn every drone and all the little, you know, quirks to it. And so it's, you know, and I do think it's very important, especially as a journalist, where you can't really be thinking about your gear all the time. Like, that's why I haven't made a switch to a Micro Thirds or a Fuji or anything, even though I have a Fuji camera. I still use my Nikons just because I don't want to have to think about it when, like, you know, Philly fans are flipping cars. It's just like, you know, I just want to be able to take the picture without having to think about it. So I spent all this time dialing in the Mavic and how I use it and all the settings on it, to then have to open up a bunch of menus and custom, you know, calibrate, get the gimbal to pan exactly right. It's like, you know what?
Yeah.
Once I crash this one, and it's irreparable.
Indeed. Yeah, I have no desire or need to get a new drone. It's kind of like GoPros. You know, I bought one a few years ago, and you know, it's basically just sits there, and I use it occasionally. It's kind of like the drone. I use it occasionally. Did you do any drone work during the Philly celebrations by chance?
Well, so no, although there were a bunch of guys. I mean, I'm in contact with this one guy who's licensed, and he's flying at night over these people. And I'm like, are you sure you took the same test as me? Because I'm very sure that it says you can't fly at night and over people, you know? But so not only are the police not very excited about, like, I was listening to the scanner last night and there was like 10, we got a drone, you know? So you're inviting problems with the police if they see you flying it, even if I am licensed, but whatever, it's still, there's no way to fly above that crowd and not be above people, which technically is violating the rules of my license. It's also at night, so you're not allowed to fly at night. And unfortunately, because of Philadelphia International is such a large big international airport, it has a Class B airspace, which doesn't come anywhere near the surface in Center City, Philadelphia, but is still technically Class B. And as such, you need a waiver to fly in the city of Philadelphia as a license. But before, when I flew the drone, the picture that we were just talking about, I wasn't licensed. I was studying for my license at the time. So this is actually one of the interesting things I find talking about drone ethics. And, you know,
let's talk about drone ethics. I mean,
so
that's one of the topics we're going to talk about. Let's just roll right into it.
Let's get there. You know, so it's a perfect example. There's plenty of people out there last night flying drones. One of them I know is licensed, and he's flying. And I wrote him a thing being like, how did you get your airspace authorization? Because I sent one in the moment I got my license, and that's 6 months ago, and I'm still waiting for it. Right. So, because they've set up a system now where supposedly there's maps that they're not even, the FAA isn't even doing it. They're outsourcing it, but I guess they're just backlogged. But there are maps that say, if they ask for a waiver here, just give it to them. And I only asked for places that were outside. Like, I didn't go anywhere near Philadelphia International Airport. So but I still haven't gotten it back. And so I'm not flying because I'm trying to follow the rules, and I want to be able to use my license, and I want to be able to fly, say for Reuters, when there's an Amtrak crash or something like that. I want to be able to fly, and so I'm not going to risk my license to cover something that theoretically, if I wanted that overhead shot, I could just get on a tall building and shoot that. You know, there is another way, or the drone isn't the only way to get the shot. Right. But so then you have a guy out there who's licensed, who's flying, and, you know, he's licensed, but he's breaking the rules. And he said to me, he's like, listen, you know, the rules are too confusing. I'm being safe. No one's coming after me. So I'm just going to keep doing it. And then there's a dozen people who some might be they're all hobbyists. None of them are licensed, and some of them may be responsible, but many of them are not responsible. Some of them are like the guy that we were talking about off air with this video that maybe some people out there have seen of a drone looping over and then back down and dive bombing a passenger jet flying into Las Vegas International Airport. And you have those guys. And like I said, you know, those guys, we can't regulate against the crazy flyboy types and the really stupid ones. But it is interesting that, you know, for example, last night you have a dozen drones up. You've got cops freaking out about it, and none of them are licensed. And then the guys who are licensed, who are responsible, who actually might have a good reason to take a drone shot because it's going to go, you know, get distributed by Reuters or something like that, rather than just on someone's Facebook page. And I can't fly because I followed the rules. I took the test, and the test, the way that airspace works, drones aren't allowed to be, at least commercial drones aren't allowed to be in Class B airspace without a waiver. And so this is pretty much any major city around the country. You have the people who are trying to be the most responsible, who have the most knowledge, and who are professional, and who are giving their information willingly over to the FAA and saying, here I am. And they're not allowed to fly pretty much in any urban area. And yet you have any, you know, Joe Schmo can go down to Best Buy, grab a drone off the shelf, and send it up to 1,600 feet with no, and yes, they're not supposed to do that, but there's nowhere on the box does it say, don't fly near airports, don't, and some of the drones now have in them, they won't go near airports, but you can, if you're smart enough, you can hack those. You know, you can go online and download firmware that bypasses those restrictions. Right. And so, you know, my problem with the regulatory framework is that it really hasn't made the skies any safer, but it has forced the people who are trying to follow the rules to fly less. Right. Meanwhile, there's all these people out there who are just flying, and they're really giving us responsible flyers a bad name. And so I don't know what the answer is. I mean, I try to talk to pilots that are, and say, hey guys, like, don't fly there, because if you fly there, here's the problem. And we're all going to get, like, they won't give us airspace waivers if people keep flying in these, you know, in these sensitive areas. But I do think
it's a tough nut to crack, you know. It's tough because it's like, like the off the shelf guys, like I just got my firmware upgrade on my Mavic Pro, and I think it probably added a whole bunch of places I shouldn't fly. You know, I'm pretty, you know, I would say responsible in that I check like the Before You Fly app, you know, before I fly, and I try and, you know, not go crazy with it and go, I know you can go up to 1,600 feet, you know, beyond the 400-foot, you know, barrier if you just change some settings in the drone. I try to, you know, be responsible with where I shoot and make sure I'm not shooting any kind of airspace if possible. But it's tough because you can go out there and you can go some handmade drone, you know, that doesn't have any regulations and do whatever you want, you know.
Yeah, but the thing is like there've been hobby RC people, like people have been making remote control planes for a long time. So there actually like is a framework to deal with that. But those guys, because you had to build them, you had to understand where you could fly them. Like I feel like I wonder if we may be hobbled in the fact that there's this no new regulation thing coming out of Washington, because drones need more regulation. There's like technically, you know, you remember there's those people who are selling like shotgun shells that were called like drone killers, and like people have actually shot at drones in the United States. Like that's a felony because technically a drone is an aircraft no different than like a passenger airliner. And like, while I don't think anyone should be shooting at drones, like a 5 pound or even a half a pound drone should not be classified legally under the same framework as a plane. And like that needs to change. I mean, that's when I took my test, I have to learn how to, you know, what the markings on a runway are. Like, what is a sign on a runway that is a red field with white letters? Is that a taxiway directional sign or a taxiway interdirectional sign? When at the very beginning of the whole license thing, they say you can't fly anywhere near airports, and yet I need to know airport markings. Right. So, you know, we need to update the framework, and it doesn't seem like that's really going to happen right now. And it's unfortunate because the longer it's a wild west and the responsible actors are somewhat constrained, you're going to see more and more. Like I mentioned this, I forget the exact statistic, but last year in 2016, commercial pilots reported hundreds, like close to 1,000 visual sightings of drones.
Wow.
And if a pilot can see the drone, it's way too close to that plane, you know?
Oh yeah.
So,
but sad, you know, if like these regulations, or, you know, if they make it impossible for, you know, people to fly drones, you know, we could miss out on excellent shots like the one you did for Time, you know, or, you know, the one that was featured
I couldn't
in Time.
take that shot now. I could not take that shot now as a licensed pilot without a waiver. That shot is not available to me.
Wow.
No.
See, I think that's just shame, really. Missing out on those type of opportunities. But, you know, again, got to do it within the right constraints so you're safe.
Well, I think the way to do it is, you know, and this is already happening. Journalists are coming together and trying to work with the FAA to figure out new rules. And there's hope there. Because I do think, you know, if you start to make it a little less difficult for, say, journalists and media to fly, the people who are already working in tandem and coordinating with emergency response services, whether it's in Puerto Rico or a firefighting crew at a house fire, you know, journalists are used to that interface and being able to work in that space and not get in the way. And then start to kind of make some more restrictions, like maybe DJI, every commercial drone it sells has to have a limiter, you know, that automatically it can't fly above 400 feet. And that the only way to break that is, other than, you know, hacking, like I mentioned, would be to type in your FAA pilot number, and then you get the pilot's version of the drone, and you're actually, it's cracked and you're allowed to do it. But I do think the most important thing is just that, like, drone pilots who are responsible, you know, try to promote safe flying, you know, and to fly safe themselves, and you know, to take the rules seriously, even if they don't make sense, like, you know, to follow them for now, at least, until we can figure out a better framework.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Any thoughts about drone ethics there in Australia?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, the regulations always hamper those who want to follow the rules when they become more and more restrictive. And just thinking, I mean, that's similar to your gun rights and regulations in the US. You don't have to worry about the person who gets a license. It's the person who's, you know, buying guns illegally or stocking up on ammunition or something like that. I mean, those who want to follow the rules will follow the rules because they understand why there's a regulation. You can't regulate people who are just going to, you know, disregard the rules completely.
Well, but as you know well, in Australia, I mean, you know, there is a way to, you know, before the like, we have so many guns in this country, it's impossible to get rid of them. We haven't got to that level of drone perfusion yet, right? Everybody doesn't have a drone yet. And so hopefully, exactly, not yet, but probably soon. So hopefully we could figure out some sort of way to deal with that, instead of, because guns, obviously, to go down that road with drones would be very bad, where,
of course,
you know, you have a lot of people who have it. And so some way of, I think you're right, though, you know, you're going after it, just like you said, the gun dealer who's registered with the ATF, he's not the problem, you know. But hopefully we can figure out some way of, you know, restricting drones before it gets it, because if we take it the American way, where everybody just gets to do whatever they want, I mean, there's not going to, how could we have flying cars, or how could we have those, or like remote, have you seen the drones that are ambulances, you know?
Yes.
You can't have that. I mean, we can barely have helicopters flying safely when you have a bunch of drones around.
Well,
so
we had a drone recently, I think it was in New South Wales, that the people were struggling out at sea. I guess potentially going to drown. And the drone within minutes had dropped them a life preserver, until the surf rescue people could actually get to them properly.
Saw that. Amazing.
And that's amazing. You know, that's proper use of a drone.
Exactly.
And I got no problems with that. I think that's excellent. I just hope that, you know, with the footage we were talking about before, let's just hope that, you know, we're not talking about a plane that came down because of a drone. That would just be heartbreaking.
Well, exactly. And like you say, you know, we can't, there's no way to regulate stupidity, but maybe we can make it harder for stupid people to do stupid things.
Yeah.
And so,
I mean,
a fine $250,000 and imprisonment for up to 3 years. That's one way.
Yeah, but nobody follows the rules based off of the prison sentence. You know, like marijuana can get you jail time in every state in this country or most states, and people are still doing it. You know, I think the better thing would be to nip it in the bud on the manufacturer end. Stop letting, you know, DJI make a lot of money by just letting, you know, there needs, I mean, I have a friend who has a drone, and I told him, I said, you know, you're not allowed to fly above 400 feet, just telling him the rules. And he's like, really? He's like, I had that thing up a mile yesterday. And I'm like, a mile? How do you even have that drone back anymore? And then I look at his map, and he's right near a military base. And it's like, you know, like you're flying up a mile in where there's military airplanes. And like, I don't think that drone should come out of the box able to do that, you know?
Yeah.
If they can make it so you can't fly next to an airport, they can make it so you can't fly a mile up in the air. Like that guy who goes over that plane, he's way higher than 400 feet. You know, I mean, that guy's that's probably his own drone, though. He's probably an FPV race builder, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just hope that we can figure it out soon, because I do think, like I said earlier, that drones can be a really important tool when it comes to emergencies and when it comes to some things that are just hard to visualize from the ground when the scope of something is so large. Like you remember, I mean, how many drone pictures from California or Houston did we see this year looking down at neighborhoods that just showed the devastation in a way that the only you put that picture next to the picture of the people who were, you know, who are coming back to their homes and crying. And you get both the kind of the context of the devastation, and then the straight to the heart, pinpoint emotional connection. And you can really, I mean, it's a very effective way of communicating a disaster to someone.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at any of the top 100 lists, and we highlight a lot of them on our website, you know, a lot of the top 100 photos in many of the series are drone shots. You know, and it's just becoming a more and more captivating medium by which, you know, photographers, visual journalists are using to capture a story. So yeah, it should be regulated. I mean, hopefully they don't have to completely stop the sale of drones in the country. You know, I think that's just going to create a black market.
Well, we live in capitalism. You're not going to stop them. I mean, getting getting the regulators on there, I think, is going to be a tough thing. You know. Yeah.
Nobody's going to agree on what they need to do.
Exactly.
Well, you know, a drone takes down an airliner or something crazy like that. I think there's going to be a change, you know.
Well, that would certainly promote one. I just, you know, it would be so horrible if that's what and because, you know, no one makes good decisions. I mean, think about all the stupid decisions we made after 9/11. You know, when something disastrous happens, people react in their gut, and it's not smart. It's not science-based. It's not evidence-based. It doesn't. You know, so fingers crossed there's another way to getting smarter regulation.
Yeah. Do you guys have any other thoughts on these other drone ethics things? Obviously, besides flying the drone, you know, there's some stuff here that talks about where you should fly your drone, where you should point your drone.
You mean privacy issues?
Privacy.
Privacy is, you know, I mean, there was this guy in New York, right, who was taking pictures through the glass of his building to the glass in Williamsburg, these towers, and he got like it's this huge museum exhibition. And if that's legal to be shooting into other people's apartments, the idea that you could kind of be more invasive than that with a drone, I mean, people aren't putting drones up to people's windows. I mean, first of all, if there's a drone outside your window, you're going to notice that pretty quick. It's not, you know, it's not a discreet thing, the buzz of a drone. And the drone's cameras are, you know, they're relatively, I mean, if people are concerned about privacy and drones, they should probably be more concerned about the drone blimps that police departments want to fly over our cities tracking our movement rather than, you know, the media flying 200 feet over some house fire. You know, I really think that the privacy stuff, it's really knee jerk. And, you know, I mean, I can't really see a way that you could actually really kind of violate someone's privacy with a drone in a way that you couldn't do some other easier legal way, you know, standing in front of their house with a camera, you know.
Well, yeah, it's no longer, it's not illegal. It's just unethical. And I remember reading about that particular photographer that had the exhibition. And I thought he was taken to court, and it was proved that he didn't do anything wrong. Nobody was doing anything inappropriately, but I mean, they were in their houses. Don't get me wrong, or their apartments. But,
and there was enough. they weren't, you couldn't identify them, I think was part
that's
of it
right.
too, right?
That's right. But the fact that he was standing on public ground and taking photos, looking into people's apartments, you just think, well, that's a bit creepy.
But the standard is, are the blinds drawn? In the United States, if they draw the blinds and you're shooting through the blinds, well, they had an expectation of privacy.
Fair enough.
If they're getting naked next to their glass window in New York City, do they have an expectation of privacy? I mean, you're right. There's an ethics thing. Like, would I do that? Should journalists be doing that? Absolutely not.
No.
But again, with a drone, like, okay, should I fly over private property with a drone without the owner's permission? I mean, that
sure,
is
the airspace above 80 feet is free airspace, right? I mean, the owner only goes up to 80 feet. That's what
that's true, right? They don't, sky rights are sky rights. But the thing is, it depends what it is, right? So, for example, I took some pictures of a pipeline, the path of a proposed pipeline, and there was an Amish farm that was right in the way, and they had sold part of their land for the easement. And I flew from across the street on different property, and I wasn't over his property, and I took a picture of it. I didn't fly over his property. So, I mean, what's the difference though, right? I'm still taking a picture of his property that I couldn't take without being in the air, but I'm not over it. Does it matter? I mean, for me, I wasn't doing anything, that picture wasn't going to harm this person. It's just a bucolic farm. Unless you're him or someone who lives right there, you'll never be able to pin it out. I didn't put his name there. I didn't put the address down. And so you have to, like, I think each picture is, and you have to think, well, is what I'm doing ethical? Like, if there was a farm that was producing, that was leaking toxic wastewater out and had been cited a dozen times by the municipal or the county, water quality board, and they were still dumping, and you fly over top of that to take pictures of it. I mean, you have to worry about privacy and maybe them suing you, but if you're in that airspace, it's legal, and that's a legitimate news story right there. They are, But if it's some guy, if it's Meghan Markle's house, just then I don't think that's okay. So it's the same thing with the journalistic privacy ethics. You have to weigh, is there a public good or an individual negative that's going to come from me taking these pictures, and weigh those two things together and say which is more important here.
I'm currently.
You're talking about. I was just going to say that's. You're talking now about paparazzi, and I don't think we should confuse them with being photographers for the most part.
No, but the thing is at the same time, you could go just a little. Instead of say Meghan Markle, how about the Fethullah Gulen, right? So this is the Turkish cleric up in Pennsylvania who I've photographed 6 times now for Reuters. They know me pretty well up there at this compound. And one of the thoughts was, before he was letting people in and doing interviews, which he does sporadically because he's ill, but they asked me, could we get a drone shot? And it's like, well, that's private property. It's like a kind of monastic retreat. I couldn't take the picture without being over their property or being higher than 400 feet. And is there a news value to it? Just that picture, right? Could we get that picture from a satellite? Do we need to fly the drone and take that privacy legal risk? And so, I mean, there are some cases where it wouldn't be paparazzi, but still it doesn't make sense to do it. Like, what are the benefits of us flying a drone over top of his compound? Maybe if we wanted a picture of the compound, you get a helicopter, or why is the compound that important? Why don't we push for the picture inside? And that's what we kept doing. I kept showing up, and and he let us in, and I took pictures of him sitting in a chair, and that was, so I feel like there are some cases where people might say, oh, get a drone and get it up there. And it's like, well, but is this really, is there anything that's worth it that we couldn't find some other way that's not gonna, because same thing with, I don't want to photograph people who don't want to be collaborating with me in telling their story. You don't go find some heroin addict and lie to them and take their picture. You have to get people who are, willing to collaborate to some degree. And so when you're flying your drone, if you put yourself in their shoes and go, I kind of wouldn't want, or they don't, they say, get that shit away from my property. Then, like, are you going to say no? And if you're going to, and sometimes you have to do that, at a protest, or like, how many times at a nasty, horrible bombing does someone become the face of a bombing who maybe didn't want to? In that moment, are you going to go ask them, say, hey, can I send this picture of your bloodied face out? You have to, that is a question, but it's easier. But at the same time, it's like, if it's not something like that, some newsworthy, really, really important thing, if they don't want you to do it, why do it? I feel like it's kind of predatory. A lot of photographers will like not listen to people when they ask not to be photographed. And it's like, people, sure, they're out in public, but they still have a right to their dignity. And so, you have to weigh if you really want to say, I'm going to supersede your own desire to not be photographed here. And I think you have to be thoughtful about that. And it would apply.
Have to be thoughtful. Absolutely.
I'm of the mindset of, if it's visible in the public sphere, if you can see it, on the street, then you can take a picture of it. Now, whether or not you publish that photo, that's a whole different story. And that's kind of like the thing, because again, I think you have to be wary of how far you were willing to take the rights of others, because you can have people who don't want their picture taken, but they for perhaps the story reasons, they need to have their picture taken, or their picture is going to be they're going to be involved in the shot that you're going to take. But yeah, it's definitely a thing. You have to make that personal judgment with regard to is it worth it to take a picture of someone who doesn't want their photograph taken? Are you gaining something out of that? Is it really worth it to irritate them and piss them off? Or is it going to actually lend itself to the credence of the story? Exactly. I mean, there could be somebody who came up to you in the cemetery and said, "Hey, you're disgracing the sacred space that we're on and taking pictures of these sacred tombstones." What would you have done then? Would you have not published the photo because somebody had an issue with it? How far do you take that?
Exactly. I mean, but it's something that I think it's one of the reasons why I think, unfortunately, going to journalism school or working in a newsroom are important for journalists, photojournalists, because you have these discussions all the time, right? Where is the line? Because the line is not fixed. The line depends on a lot of factors, but you do have to figure out where that line is and where you're going to set it for each story. And sometimes you're going to push it, and sometimes you're gonna respect somebody else's wishes a little more. But it's just important to think about these things. And I feel like a lot of times nowadays we've just gotten past it. We're in the world where it's on the internet, everything's free, everything's public. You can, and it's like
also everybody's allowed to get upset.
Well, exactly, too. Everybody's getting upset, and so, but then you have to push back against that too. Exactly.
Yeah, we
are getting to the point where everybody wants to be in control of their own image. I mean, I've had to stop working on stories because the person just would not let me decide what pictures were going to be in the edit, and I'm like, listen, so not. So,
yeah. Well, speaking of setting up lines and crossing them, let's talk about sexual harassment at Nat Geo. So a member of the photojournalism community called Patrick Whitty basically was using his position of power in his role as a photo editor at Nat Geo, of course, one of the most well-revered publications of our time. He was using his position essentially, and also just his overall, feelings about himself and his capabilities to essentially sexually harass women and push himself on women and be, overly aggressive towards women in terms of a sort of touchy-feely kind of way.
Yeah, I mean,
there's
a number of allegations. There's a number of allegations that were
all alleged.
But put forward by women who actually put their names to it. And this is something I think we should talk about. After two women put their names to it, and I know these women. And I know
Andrea Wise actually was mentioned in the article. She's been a guest on this show.
Yes, Andrea, exactly. Who Patrick, kissed her, grabbed her, and kissed her. And so these are women who are putting they're standing up to someone who, Patrick Whitty was known in the so-called whisper networks, of women saying, "Hey, watch out for this guy," for years, right? Yeah. But no one had ever made a complaint. Time said we never had a complaint. Wired said we never had a complaint. Missouri Workshop said we never had a complaint. At the Eddie Adams Workshop, there was a complaint, and he was banned from ever coming back the moment that the complaint was made. But unless someone complains publicly, you don't really know. And so these women, and that's one of the things that many of these predators in our industry and other industries take advantage of, that women are too afraid to come forward. And so now we're at this moment with Me Too, right, where people are coming forward. And I think that's the impetus is now switched on to men to actually change things, right? So all these men who knew about Patrick Whitty and just didn't do anything, right? What is that? And it's still, because he's important. And there's plenty of photographers out there who, there was the Bill Frakes incident. This is he was got a Title IX case against him, and Title IX in universities, I mean, that's a rigorous process. And he was let go of the staff of the University of, I believe, Nebraska, right? For a number of lewd and acts and comments to one of his students. He never propositioned her anything. He was just a creep. And then when she confronted him about it, he said, "You'll never work again. You'll never work in this industry." And it's very interesting that that's the same line that Patrick Whitty is supposedly has used. So a lot of people in whatever power position they're in whatever industry use that threat, and it's an implied threat. You don't even have to say it. These are your idols. These are the people you look up to. I mean, I've had to say like, look, it's not acceptable to hit on students at a workshop, and it's like that should be kind of obvious, right? You
shouldn't have to even say that,
but it's not. And so I mean, I think that a lot of people are wondering like why Sarah Lean at National Geographic didn't make a statement, or why people at the Eddie Adams workshop haven't made a statement. And they have made statements through the channels with which they can. But when you fire someone for allegations, right, like you said, they are allegations.
Yes.
I mean, 20 allegations, 20 women have now came forward, but still, they're just allegations. You fire someone for that. That person can file a complaint and could sue, and is probably doing that the moment it happens. And so anyone at an organization, the women who are like Molly Roberts posted, she works at National Geographic, they'll say what they can, but they're very, very limited. And so I think that one of the things that a lot of people did after Patrick Whitty is says, well, these were women run organizations and they're ignoring the problem. Like, because the New York Times, Michelle McNally, and I think that's pretty quickly just throwing it back on women. It's like, wait, what about us men? And what are we doing to stop this? Are we standing up to the men who we know are predators? Are we, right. I think the most important thing is like, are we creating a space where if something did happen, that the women would feel comfortable coming forward? Me Too has brought a lot of people out, but I don't think we're still there yet where women truly feel that they're safe coming forward. I mean, with the amount of harassment that women just have to go through as women, to then risk their career to potentially throw someone under the bus who they watch everybody else ignoring this behavior. Anyone can see it if you're looking for it, and then everyone's ignoring it. And so some student is going to step forward and it's all going to change. I mean, that seems daunting. And that's why it's incredibly brave of any woman who comes forward and puts her name down and says, this happened to me. And so, I think it really is that we're at this kind of point in, and this is true with people of color too, like Andrea, who was on the show, or Brent Lewis, they have this thing called Diversify Photo. And, they've put together a list of photographers of color, and there's a list of women women photographers, but still people aren't hiring them, and so it is now easier because the list is there. But like, the men at all of these papers need to say, wait, where are the women in this room? Where are the women in our paper? Where are the Black people? Where are the people of color? Where are the people who are from the communities that we're covering in our newsroom, in our organization, or when they're in, we're 4 men talking right now. But generally, if I was in a space making decisions and there were only 4 men talking, I'd feel a little uncomfortable and say, hey, maybe to be honest, I'd be willing to give my position up on any board or jury of anything if there was for a woman, if there were not already women on it. It seems kind of obvious to me. But again, I'm from a younger generation. I'm part of this movement, right? And so I do think that one of the things that there is a challenge is we have to get beyond the shouting on the internet and actually figuring out how to sit down and talk to people and make changes in the organizations where we are. And, not everybody, some people are so-called old school. That doesn't mean that they're just like a straight up misogynist, but you know, it also doesn't mean that we should just excuse their old school behavior. You know, you have to work with those people. I mean, this is probably true with politics in our country, right? You know, we have to find a way to kind of find a middle ground and convince the people who may be reticent to see the problems that there first is a problem, and then how to deal with it. And not just say, oh, you're ignoring it, you know. I mean, and I think that's one of the things that the people like Andrea, Daniela Zachman, people who are actually doing stuff in real life, in action, have figured out that's the hardest step. And it is easy on the internet to start leading witch hunts and yelling, but really, you know, and it's good, to be honest. You know, I mean, they're not really witch hunts, to be honest, but to kind of get everybody on this bandwagon of condemning an organization or a person, and that's just only the beginning. I mean, the hardest stuff is next. And again, I do think the impetus really is on the men of the photojournalism industry to find the Patrick Whitties, to call the Patrick Whitties out, to create spaces where if there is someone who's harassed, that they can come forward, feel comfortable and safe coming forward, and then to create work, you know, not just the harassment, but also, you know, just perspective to make our companies, to make our organizations, to make our jury panels, to make our you know, to just make everything in the industry more representative of the communities that we cover and the communities that make us up, you know, which is women and people of color. So a battle you know,
you talk about other photographers, you know, Terry Richardson, we talked about him a few weeks ago. Here's another one who just, you know, again, used his power and his position and, you know, was doing extremely lewd acts with not only models, but others, you know, who he worked with. So, you know, but again, it's good that these things are coming to light. You know, I mean, I don't know if you have to deal with any of this stuff where you're at or have experienced anything, you know, yourself there, Craig. I've actually never, I mean, I guess being a guy, it's obviously, you know, I can't speak to a position of having experienced it myself. But, you know, what are your thoughts on this, Craig?
Well, I mean, even just back to the photo shoot I had yesterday. So I'm in close contact with a model and we were working in my swimming pool. When she told me we'd arranged it all, and she asked if her partner could come along. And more than happy, you know, the partner, she stood off to the side, she watched. In fact, she got involved later on. But it was a case of I'm happy with somebody being there. If I can't get my wife around or an assistant, or if I'm working with another photographer, I was actually worried about it, thinking I need to get somebody here because I don't know this person, and the last thing I know you, and she doesn't know me.
So she'll feel much more comfortable working with you if she doesn't feel like she's alone in some creepy guy's pool.
Exactly right. And as soon as she said, "Look, do you mind if my partner comes along?" I said, "No, not that's perfect. Please bring her along." And we had a
photograph her too.
Well, she jumped. Well, she's a swimmer, so I said, "Right, go get your bathing suit. Let's. You know, I'll get a couple of photos with you as well."
Yeah,
and lovely images just for the two of them. And but I got some nice shots of her. And as I got, you know, I tend to start out away from the model and sort of do some wide shots. But then as I get closer and I say, look, I'm going to get a lot closer to you. Is that a problem? By this stage, you know, we've built up a rapport. There's not normally an issue. And I get some nice, you know, closer, you know, portraits and things like that. But I'm conscious of it because I want to protect my reputation. Plus, I want to make sure that the model is feeling comfortable. Because at the end of the day, you've only got your reputation. I mean, as we've just said, you know, Terry Richardson, I can't expect that he will ever get up to the heady heights that he used to do.
Yeah, thank God.
He's hopefully done and gone, and you know, there should not be any sort of tolerance for people like him.
Right.
And I would hate to ever be put in the same sentence as him, you know, for the same sort of acts. I mean, that's not my character, but yeah, that's just not acceptable from anybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking. Yeah. No, go ahead, Charles.
Well, you know, it is true. You know, there are two sides to this. Like the allegation thing, right? And you know, an allegation is just an allegation. When there's 20, when there's 40, when people know it's an open secret. I mean, Terry Richardson was no secret. I mean, he has pictures of himself holding his penis into women's mouths. I mean, it's like, you know, he brags about that kind of stuff.
No,
and yet it still went on, right? It still went on. And so there's that. But on the other side of the spectrum, you know, if you do have to be careful, because these are people's lives, people's careers. And, you know, one, you know, if a vindictive person could make something up, and that could tank a career. And then at the same time, also, you know, like I said earlier, some people, they you know, they're not paragons of sexual freedom and understanding, but maybe they're also not creepy misogynists, right?
No.
Like, so we do have to be careful that we don't, you know, engage in you know, I mean, as a journalist, right? I mean, that's at least in journalism or in photography in general, you could take this from journalism, due diligence, right? Got to do due diligence. But at the same time, we do live in an environment where, you know, it takes, you know, 5, 10 women to come out and say something before any of them is believed, right? So,
well, that's right. But normally one allegation, as you said before, that could just be somebody being vindictive and trying to bring somebody down.
Exactly. And
for whatever reason. But when it starts to get,
but it usually isn't, but it could be. And we do have to be careful that we don't make rushes to judgment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there definitely has to be a balance to it, you know, and with regard to, you know, one person can make a truly, you know, if they make a really, you know, an allegation that is truly damning, then it doesn't matter. You don't need 5 people, you know, you need to take that one person and actually investigate. And I think any allegation, 1 or 1,000,000 or whatever, if it's 1, it deserves investigation. You know, there has to be some sort of investigation and to look into that again. And I think it's sad, and I think we're seeing the change here, where we're going from a time when it takes 20 people to say something for something to happen, and now you're starting to see, hopefully, again, I can't speak from that perspective, but hopefully it'll come to a point where, again, somebody makes one allegation and then that person is under the microscope, and, you know, there's scrutiny, and, you know, if more than one accusation comes up, it's an automatic, you know, okay, well, there's definitely something up here.
I mean, and that's the key, though, is to make changes that make it so that women feel comfortable speaking out when something happens, and just
for sure.
You know, like, for example, at school and universities, there's the Title IX. There's a process to make these complaints, and it's imposing. It's difficult, but, you know, we need to create that ability, because, you know, women coming forward is a very big risk, especially for when often, you know, sexual harassment is often more about power than it is about sex. Right. And so it's often people who are in positions of power taking advantage of people who have very little power. And so how can we expect that person to stand up if there's no support structure, if no one's, you know, now, like I said, we're getting there, but we're getting there in the mass, in the kind of like schadenfreude of the moment, but we're not actually there in individual organizations. Like, the organizations need to have, you know, to make women feel comfortable coming forward when things happen.
Absolutely. Completely agree. And, you know, one of the things that women were doing were reporting things or talking about things anonymously. And, you know, anonymous sources are a very key aspect with regard to journalism. We hear about it all the time. I mean, half the things we find out that have happened in the Trump administration are through anonymous sources. So how do anonymous sources fit into visual journalism, or do they? Is there a place for them? And, you know, I think, you know, Charles, you're probably the most able to potentially answer this question, because you work on this stuff more in a day in, day out type environment. When I was doing, you know, photojournalism, I can't think of any instance where an anonymous source would be something like, I was never like asked, how'd you find me? You know, and I have to be an anonymous, like, I have to tell somebody anonymously, you know, I got information from somebody, and that's how I found out about this story. It was all pretty open and honest. You know, I just, you know, I think it's because of the nature of our jobs. You know, we're visual documenters, so it's like, there's, you know, you can't just like you can't document someone anonymously, you know. Every photograph has a caption on it, you know. So
you actually can. I mean, I've dealt with this actually in 2 occasions this past year, and it's actually it's interesting. So the first instance is I was trying to photograph. This is actually last year, but before Trump was elected, I was trying to photograph Syrian refugees who were being settled in, and I found in 2 different times 2 people, and one of them wanted to be anonymous, and he wanted to be anonymous, not that his face wouldn't be shown, but that I wouldn't use his real full name. I wouldn't use wouldn't take pictures that could identify where he lived. I've actually did this. I photographed a transgender woman who was a prostitute and paying for her university by doing, working as a sex worker. And she didn't want kind of to be photographed in anywhere near where she lived because she had worries that she might be physically assaulted if people knew where she, because there are people who want to beat up transgender people. And so in those cases, they're not fully anonymous because they, she was willing to put her name out there, but there is that consideration that maybe there's partial anonymity that you can offer someone that will protect them in some way, right? And I think that sometimes that's worth it. Sometimes it's not worth it. Sometimes people want anonymity when they really don't need it. Like often that'll happen with political stories. They'll be like, "Oh yeah, I love Trump. You can take pictures of me, but don't put my name in." It's like, well, you gotta. That's different. But when people have physical safety issues, I mean, with illegal immigrants too, if the person's undocumented, should you not use their full name? I mean, I would argue that that's probably a fair amount of anonymity to give. And then the other situation that I've had to deal with in this was I was photographing pipeline protesters. So people who were doing civil disobedience planning, and they're getting ready at some future date to potentially do illegal acts to stop pipeline construction. So the organizer of it, she is a activist. She puts her name. She has an organization. She was more than happy to be the name and the face of the story. But I was also interested in some of these other people, and they didn't want to be identified. And so the way that I worked it out was, listen, I can't take a picture of you that focuses on you, but I could take a group shot, and there's a picture of a bunch of people looking at the pipeline map and talking about where they could put up different. And those people's faces are in it, but I didn't name them all. And so they're also not, their faces aren't in it in a way that you could put into a, police database and figure out exactly who they were. So, and they all knew I was well, true, but they also knew I was there, and it was okay that I didn't, and that, so that meant not taking pictures of one of them by themselves, where I wouldn't necessarily need to explain who this person was, but I could say a group of activists, and then they're there, but I'm not saying this person who lives in this town with this social security number and what. And so in that case too, am I helping these people do illegal stuff? Well, they haven't done anything illegal yet. They're just making plans, and they're allowing me to come in and photograph them. I mean, I photograph police officers who don't want to be identified they're happy to have me there, but they want the side of their head. I've had doctors say you can. And so there is an amount of privacy that we would give to people like a doctor or a police officer. And so I feel there are cases, the illegal immigrant, the transgender person, the activist who are under threat for different reasons and, should get that same consideration of in some ways reducing their exposure by being the face of whatever they're being the face of. So they're not fully anonymous. I mean, there are those pictures of, people in shadows and silhouettes when they find that to be very, very difficult. If you can't show their face, it's kind of hard to make a compelling photo story out of that. But I do think there is a place to giving people a measure of anonymity. I mean, also, on a similar subject, just I had this problem. I have a friend, Ed a colleague from Canada, a photographer who did not come. He was going to Standing Rock for a second time to work on a video, and wanted his phone. And in his phone, he had all of these people who he may or may not be photographing. Maybe he's just using his background sources. Maybe they're just people who are helping get him to the right people who will be the subjects of the story. But they're all activists who, there was a semi-military operation to figure out who to monitor these people and to potentially put them in jail. And so he did not come in the United States because he did not want to give over his sources. And that is, beyond the photography, we're journalists. Often we now write with our stories. And, if a source doesn't make it into the story, that doesn't mean they're not an important part of you figuring out what the story is and doing the research. There's a lot of people who you talk to get a story who never actually make it in, but you never would have been able to do it without them. And so I feel it is important to stand up to the state when the state says you have to give me that, because we have some states have shield laws, but journalists are not particularly protected in the United States as to their sources, and I think that is something that photojournalists kind of forget sometimes, that we don't think about this, protecting our sources because we photograph them. But again, there are a lot of people who make those pictures happen who aren't in the pictures, who could potentially be at risk if we were to give over their information to, the state. And I think visual journalists need to be more part of the conversation around protecting and strengthening the ability for journalists to not really reveal who their sources are, because otherwise no one's going to want to talk to us. And no one,
Yeah. In kind of when you were talking, it made me think about other aspects of my career where I've seen something like that happen. And now you mention it, there have been times where I have experienced or been a part of stuff like that. In the military, we sometimes document people who are like special forces or special ops, or, again, they work and operate in sort of the behind the, front line type of environment, where if their image tied with their name is out there in the open on the internet, there's the potential where perhaps if they get captured, that can be used against them somehow. It can be tied to their social media accounts or something like that. And, there can be that sort of fear by them that, again, they don't want their name out there. They're less concerned with their image, although a lot of them don't want their image released either, unless they're like wearing shades or something. But, all those instances that I've ever encountered, at least in the small subset of times I've dealt with it, the examples of how their lives are sort of compromised by what they put online is more tied to what they decide to put on like social media, themselves. That's what's going to get them in trouble, is because that's where they're going to find out who their wife is or who their children are or where they live, is because they're putting themselves out there on social media, not because I'm documenting them and I happen to write their name and job in a photograph, with their their face in it. But I can see definitely, in certain areas where, perhaps, again, they're doing stuff that's more clandestine, they don't want anything out there as much as possible. And, as a photographer and as, especially in the military, you have to respect that, because, they're the ones who are putting more of their lives on the line than you are. So,
well, exactly. We're privileged as photographers to be able to photograph people's lives. And so we have to find a way, just that a doctor tries to do no harm. We also have a responsibility to not only, be fair to the people, but also to, to respect them and to realize that they are sacrificing, they're giving of themselves. They're doing something they do not have to do. And, you're responsible for taking some amount of ownership over what happens to them based off of what you do. I mean, at some point you can't be responsible for everything, but I do feel that, it's going to happen more and more as people seek to shelter themselves from, but like you say, maybe they're on Facebook. And so sometimes maybe you'll have to tell people, hey, I'm sorry, listen, and I've had to do this, listen, either you're on the record and your name's, we're not doing this. I can't do it any other way. But I do think there are going to be more and more cases where, we do have to be very careful about how much information on that person we present. I mean, like the transgender thing, I had never even thought about this, but she says, don't take pictures of me looking out this window, because that building across the street is really obvious. It's a noticeable, distinct building, and people are going to know where I live, and I would feel threatened by that. And this is someone who's literally like modeling for these, really posed portraits. And she's like, don't take a picture that can identify where I live. I hadn't even thought about it. But of course, that makes perfect sense to me now.
Yeah, I mean, now in this day and age, you've got internet trolls who do nothing but, can take a photograph of innocuous and then find your address and phone number and everything like that, because, there are people with more time than sense, and they're internet sleuths. And then, of course, they want to dox you, or they want to SWAT you, or, just, harass you online till the end of time. Yeah, it's a pretty important deal, because like, you don't want to burn that bridge either. You don't want to take a photograph that's now going to get her in trouble, or get her, somebody harassing her, and now, well, there you go. You're never going to cover that story again, or at least not with her, or she'll get around and the community won't adopt you. Because that's one of the things we dealt with a lot, is that, if you don't respect people's rights in terms of what they want photographed, what they don't want photographed, or what they want published and not want published, now you just burned all those bridges for everybody else. I mean, I found it very difficult to get photographs of things because people in the past had released stuff that they shouldn't have released. And now it's like, well, we're not going to let you photograph anything we're doing because you're a risk, you're a liability. Yeah. We're not even going to let you in our space.
Back to the like power thing. It's, you know, it's what is being documenting someone's life? What is being allowed in to work with someone, to photograph them? Is that you imposing yourself, your vision, your desires, what you think the story is on them? Or is it a collaboration of sorts? And I think, you know, it's hard to argue that it's not a collaboration, and we need to make it a collaboration. Of course, you don't want to cede all of the, you know, control of a story or a shoot to the subject, the person who's the focus of the story, but to not include them and to not be considerate of their wishes. Not only is it, I think, you know, that's exactly the power dynamic that we need to get rid of in photojournalism, but also you're not going to get a good story if it's probably going to be wrong if it's just what you think and you're not listening to people. But if also you just force yourself on people and you do things your way or the highway, it's not going to be a very good story. I mean, you know, it could win awards, but, you know, that doesn't mean it's very good.
Craig,
that just means people, you know.
Craig, you deal with a lot of models and obviously weddings and stuff where you're being invited to shoot folks. But what's your sort of policy with regard to what you actually publish of them? Is it something like you want to get their permission to publish what you decide to publish, or do you just kind of do what you want? And what do you do when you have somebody who wants to like look over your stuff and not let you publish stuff?
I make it clear that, particularly with the models, because occasionally I will do some art nude or fine art nude stuff. They're okay with that, or I sort of explain what I will and won't show. Normally, I've built up that rapport with the model, and they know they've come to me because of the, you know, the work I can do or what I have done. I will sort of seek permission at times, or I'll make it clear what I want to use. And if they're not comfortable with something, and that's not usually the case, you know, I'll have it written down in my on my release. I'll make a note. You know, even with like domestic portraits, you know, I'll do a family shoot. Quite often, if it's a, you know, nice young family type thing, I'll ask them, or I'll let them know, you know, is it possible for me to use some of these photos for my social media? And I've had it where, particularly with families with the young kids, they've said, "Oh, we'd prefer not." And I said, "That's fine." And I'll make a point of writing it down in front of them, no images to be used for social media. So that's okay. I've sold a package. I've given them the photos, and in that particular instance, I'm not going to use any of the photos, particularly with children. So I make it clear that I might want to use images. If they have a problem with that, I make sure it's documented. That the release is scanned and put in the folder with all of the photos, and I know that I can't use those photos, which is a shame sometimes. But I quite understand that, you know, some people don't want their children splashed across the internet.
Great, yeah, no, absolutely. When I was getting my wedding done, our photographer wanted to post pictures from our wedding on his social media page or on his website, you know, as portfolio pieces. And I was like, I'm okay with that. I just want to look at the pictures before you decide that, because you know, photograph you think is innocuous and, you know, looks fun. You know, my wife is very particular about the pictures that I post of her, and she has gotten on my butt many times for posting things that she thinks are not flattering. And I'm like, honey, but it's real, it's honest.
That's right.
This is who you are.
But that's you can have that conversation.
That's right. You have to have that conversation.
And sometimes with people who you photograph journalistically, they, you know, you can they're like, I don't really like that picture, and you say, but listen, in the context of the story, I know, you know, this picture, you don't like it for this reason. You know, it could be simple as it's a bad hair day, but it's like it really drives the story, and you work with the people. I mean, when you write a story, right before you go to publish it, usually, you know, and I've written and I worked in, you know, I went to college for this. And what you do is you call the subject and you go over the piece with them. You don't literally read the piece to them so they go, I don't like that word. But you go over it and you say, okay, so I'm saying, you know, that you were born on this date. And then I talk about how we were at the bar. And then I have this quote, and you read them the quotes, right? You do read them the quotes. And, you know, sometimes they say, oh, I didn't say that. And it's like, actually, I have this on, I can play it back for you if you'd like, right? But you go over the quotes and you make sure that you're doing a fair representation and that they're not going to open up the paper tomorrow and be like, what the hell did this person write about? And so I feel like photography more or less should go by that same standard, that you review what you're doing with the person and make it somewhat collaborative so that they feel, and it's just going to be a better story that way too. People, they'll trust you much more and let you in much more if you're open from the beginning about what you want to do with the pictures and how you're going to use them. And then maybe they say, I mean, this happens all the time. They're like, okay, but you know, there's certain things I'm not going to let you photograph. And then when it comes around to it, they're like, you know what, come in here, get in here. And they let you photograph the most revealing thing because you've won the trust of them.
That's right.
Because you've made it collaborative and open from the start. And so I think that's the key.
Absolutely. I think often I'll share with a model or even with like a wedding couple, I might text them through a couple of teaser photos first. So they'll see them before anybody else does. And if the feedback from, 3 or 4 images is quite positive, there's we love them type thing, or, ooh, I look horrible in that one, please don't use that, then I know not to use it. But normally the model or the couple or whoever, they've seen at least a snapshot of the photos I'm going to use or I'd like to use before anybody else. So there is the discussion beforehand, but also you give them an idea of what you've got. They love it or they don't, and then you know what you can and can't use.
Yeah, and you're not showing them the raws. You're not like,
no,
these
are the edits.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You give them the, you give them the selects at the end.
Correct.
You're not letting them have total executive control over the project.
Definitely not.
But you're allowing them to feel part of it and give feedback and to have some amount of veto power. You don't give them all the veto power.
No.
But it's important to have them involved.
Just give them the illusion of control. That's why I think the illusion.
Yeah.
Anyways, let's wrap up this week's show.
Perfect.
Of course, I always like to give our guests the opportunity to plug or publish or promote whatever you'd like to promote. So, Charles, where can people find out more about you? Where would you like people to go to? What would you like to plug?
Well, my website is charlesmostoller.com. And if you're interested on some of the work that I've done here in Philly, go check it out. There's some cool stories on there.
All right, great. We'll have that link in the show notes. As always, Craig, what can people go to for you?
Right. Well, my website is stampfley.photography. So my surname.photography, and Instagram for me is craig.stampfley. That's where most of my stuff goes.
Great. Thank you. As always, thank you so much, Craig. And
that's right.
Thank you much, Charles, for being guest on our show this evening. Truly appreciate it. If you as a listener, thank you so much, guys. If you as a listener would like to connect with myself or any of our guests, please go to our website, www.aroundthelens.com. You'll find links to all our social media and all that fun stuff. And you can like us and share us and, just do whatever you want to us. I mean, honestly, really, just anything you... Wait, no, that's not right. Anyways, go online, become our friends. We want to be friends with you, friends of the show. And again, like I said, at the beginning of the show, go listen to The Candid Frame. Again, I gave some insights into my life and personality, kind of how I came up in the world of photography. So if you're interested, again, that's a great show. And I think a great interview. And, again, he does great stuff on that show. So Candid Frame, I can't recommend it enough. Please go out and listen to that. So again, Charles, thank you so much.
Oh, it was a pleasure, guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Craig, as always, your dependability is unmatched. Thank you so much. You're gonna be our fourth host here soon.
Foreign correspondent. How's that?
I like it. All right. Well, I've been David J. Murphy. This has been Around the Lens, episode 110, and we are out.